So let's talk about some spring intel. Let's focus on a few kind of different players this time. Last time we talked about maybe a few different positions groups and stuff like that. This time we have a few different players that are gaining some more buzz in their practices, whether it's the coaches that talked about them or the media that's talked about them. One of them in particular, Billy Edwards Jr. at Wisconsin, has been noted for his incredible leadership. Luke Fickell said, you study." Excuse me. You study them before you have any idea of who people really are. It's easy to pop on the film and things like that. But he said, I knew that I believed what we've seen, and it was a ball player. Luke Fickell giving his endorsement to Billy Edwards. This is good news for Wisconsin fans. They obviously were a little concerned with bringing him in. They didn't know exactly what they were going to get, but leadership stuff like that from Billy Edwards sounds great. What are your thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, I don't know if you heard Luke Fickell be this emphatic in praise of previous quarterbacks he's brought in, like Tanner Mordecai. I'm blanking on the quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, a year ago. Like there was a lot of hype because of past accomplishment, but there wasn't necessarily a ton of hype because of leadership. And we know what Billy Edwards can bring onto the field, right? Like I thought for Maryland, even though Maryland was not as good last year, I did think that Billy Edwards was a bright spot, in my opinion, to I think an overall bad roster and poorly managed team. Although we're gonna talk with Lawrence from 247, he might correct me about that, but in my opinion, he was a bright spot. The fact that he's coming in and providing leadership is huge because I think that team needs leadership. That team needs a leader to get in there and be a dog. And I think that's a big deal for a Wisconsin team that is staring down the barrel of what we've said is easily the hardest schedule in the country. Except if you're like S&P plus or whatever thing you are. But they clearly, if not the hardest, a top 3 hardest schedule in the country. And you have a coach who may not be on the hot seat, but he's on the verge of being on the hot seat. So a lot of uncertainty, a really tough schedule. What do you need? You need a dude who's going to be willing to go through the fire for you. So this is very encouraging to me if I'm Luke Fickell.
Yeah, it's something I've brought up about a guy like Luke Altmaier. Luke Altmaier is a gamer. Luke Altmaier is a game changer because of his leadership, because of his, willingness to just put his nose in it and do whatever needs to be done. That game against Michigan last year was so eye-opening to me about Luke Altmaier. I mean, the guy had a bad game, like throwing wise, like he did not, make some of the reads he should have made, like stats wise, things were not good, but he was the star of the team in that game on offense because he was the guy that kept that offense going every single time. The plays that they scored on, they would not have made if it wasn't for Luke Altmaier keeping that offense running, keeping that offense going down the field. There were plenty of situations where he just stuck his head in there and said, I'm getting the first down. It's going to happen. I think sometimes when we talk about leadership at a quarterback, it can sound a little, like not really real. It's like, oh, okay, so he can give a speech in front of the team. What's that matter? Yeah. That kind of stuff doesn't matter as much to me. It's the play on the field, right? We just saw the inverse of Kyle McCord at Ohio State with Will Howard there. And we've seen how important that is. At least Ohio State fans have seen how important that is to them. And to me, that means a lot for this Wisconsin team. And that means a lot for Luke Fickell because that's the type of dude that Luke Fickell is. And I think he's found himself, a guy who is a gamer, who's going to get his team the win, whatever he can possibly do. And I think that means a lot for Fickell. So, any other thoughts on that before we move on to the Michigan wide receiver?
I think your point in that, it's that type of leadership that keeps one loss from ballooning to 3 losses or a bad series into 4 or 5 bad series. And, aside from that game against the team up north, like we saw that with Will Howard, he'd make a mistake, shake it off. The team had confidence. It's the same thing for Wisconsin now with Billy Edwards. If he continues to develop, he continues to do this, which is really important going from series to series, game to game, with a schedule that's going to be brutal.
Totally. Totally. All right. Let's also look at a Michigan wide receiver, Jamar Browder, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, but I think that's how it is. Jamar Browder. He is a 6'5" freshman wide receiver for Michigan. Not a ton of hype around the country for him. He was only a 3-star guy, but by the way it sounds, he is coming in and providing something for this Michigan offense that is very much needed, which is somebody that can go down the field for them and get balls out of the air, can be a big target, possibly in the red zone. I mean, Zach, we know this Michigan team struggled last year. One of the big reasons why was because of the wide receivers. I was
Yeah.
on record saying I didn't think, what was the Davis Warren. I didn't think Davis Warren was, the most awful quarterback in the world that some people said, right? Like I didn't think he was. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's good, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think he was as awful as people said. I thought a lot of this had to do with Davis Warren didn't really have any threats on the outside. Davis Warren didn't really have anybody to throw to on the
Yep.
outside. I think he would have looked better with some better wide receivers, and so that's definitely something that's part of it there. But Bryce Underwood needs guys that he can go to, needs guys that he can rely on. And it sounds like this Jamar Browder, at the very least, is starting to turn into a type of red zone target, somebody that can go down the field, make big plays. He made a wow play in practice
Mm-hmm.
this last week where the Max Bredesen, TJ Guy, I mean, leaders on this team were kind of, wowing at what he was able to do and saying, like, this is a really important play. This is a really big play he was able to make down the field, getting over the secondary and doing some of that stuff. So if you're a Michigan fan, you gotta love hearing about Jamar Browder. And I think even for us, as people covering the entire Big Ten, it's something to take note of. Maybe he's not wide receiver one, but it's something to take note of as it can add another aspect to this offense. You agree or disagree?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a different profile of receiver, right? They have a lot of short scat receivers, slot receivers that I think can grow and develop, but they needed someone who could go and get a jump ball. And what have we've kind of lamented the lack of diversity in their offense. And certainly when you had the offensive line they had in 22 and 23, it didn't matter, right? Smash football. But now needing a bit more versatility in your offense, having a different body at receiver is incredibly important. And so now, does spring hype mean that he's going to start from day one? No. But even if he's not a starter, he's a type of guy you can put in red zone packages. He's a type of guy like you can be versatile in your personnel packages. And I think that's a big deal. And let's be honest, most corners, they can't guard 6'5". So it's an advantage. And if it's just for that, just to have a threat down there, I think that's a win for the Michigan offense.
Very true. Very true. And if nothing else, just teach the guy how to use his body, right? Teach
Yeah.
the guy how to be able to get himself in the right position, use that body the right way. Oh my gosh, Maryland just hit a buzzer beater to win the game. That's incredible. Okay, sorry.
Dang.
I got basketball on here next to me while I'm talking football. I mean, I'm all over I got a basketball show to do later today, so yeah, John's excited about it. I figured John would be there.
Okay, for the
John's
rest.
our loyal football listener who's watching basketball with me every single night.
So, like, listen, we trash Maryland a lot on this show. I think for the next 24 hours, we can't trash Maryland.
Yeah, no trashing Maryland rule.
Yeah.
That does not extend to the Tuesday episode though, so we're good. uh, no, no, I was just gonna say, like, for me, if they can just teach him how to use his body, he can find himself in different packages and different ways for this offense, and it's gonna be helpful for him, right? Just continue to get him in the offense, continue to get him more reps. That's what he needs more than anything at this point. And I mean, Michigan is a program that has been able to do a good job of finding some 3-star talent and utilizing them the right way. So
Yep.
maybe this is just one more that they're able to do that with. We'll see what happens.
Yep.
I do want to give a shout out to Doreen, says hello, JR, and Zack, watching the women's basketball against against the Vols in C-Bus. I hope it goes the same way as the playoff game did. Catch y'all on replay. Have a great show, fellas. Thank you, Doreen. We appreciate you
Doreen.
being here. I don't know if I dislike SEC women's basketball, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I do. So go Bucks.
Amen. Amen. It's the SEC.
Yeah,
Of course we
exactly.
hate it.
Exactly. All right. Ohio State here now, Zach. Austin Siereveld got named an Iron Buckeye. So if you don't know what an Iron Buckeye is, this is essentially the award that Ohio State players get in the offseason when they go through their weightlifting, training workouts, stuff like that. It's given to the guys who show, the biggest improvement, the most effort. I mean, a lot of different things, but essentially you have to be exceptional in that area to get that award. Austin Siereveld, as we talked about in the last episode, was getting first team left tackle reps. Now, if you know anything about Ohio State's offensive line, you know that Siereveld was starting at the guard position last year, and they brought in transferred Ethan Oyanwa to be that left tackle for them. Austin Siereveld wins Iron Buckeye. He finds himself on the first team left tackle right now for the spring practice and stuff like that. Zach, I still think Ethan Oyanwa is going to win this job eventually, but do you think there could be more of a left tackle battle of brewing here in Columbus with Austin Siereveld, winning the award and showing a little bit more promise, possibly?
No, and maybe this could be a matter of opinion. If I remember correctly, Julian Fleming won Iron Buckeye a couple years ago, and like Julian Fleming was a great Buckeye, great player, or just great teammate, but everybody knew he was wide receiver 3. And when Jeremiah Smith came to town, he was wide receiver. I'm going to Penn State, because as hard as he worked in the weight room, he had lost some speed with his injuries. He had struggled with that. And I think the Iron Buckeye Award is for the hardest workers. I think Siereveld is a hard worker. And we saw that a year ago. But I think we have to make sure we don't confuse hardest workers with uber talented and also people who are transferring in. And I think it's especially difficult because Sonny Styles and Jeremiah Smith also won Iron Buckeyes, which should tell you the work ethic of especially Jeremiah Smith is insane. As good as he is, as talented as he is. But I think Siereveld, I think he's going to be a depth guy. I think he's an important depth guy, really important. But Ethan Oyanwa is being, many were saying he might have been one of the top tackles in this year's draft, and he decided to transfer. That's not someone you replace with a guy who, honestly was struggling a little bit at guard this past year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think more than anything, and Billy Tuesday's pointed out that, the Buckeyes O-line right now with the limited scholarships, they are trying to get guys to be multiple as much as possible. I do think if a guy showed that much promise in the offseason and the weight room and everything else, you have to pay up, right? You have to give him some kind of recognition for that. So stick him out there at left tackle at the very beginning of spring football, see how it goes. And right now you have a left tackle in Ethan Oyanwa that you want to make sure he feels like he earns the job as well, and the rest of the team feels like he earns it as well. So to me, it's a win-win. I think less about the left tackle position and more about this just assures to me that Austin Siereveld is going to have an impact on this offensive line for Ohio State. Zach, I don't think I have ever thought of not ever, at least in the Ryan Day era, I have never been more confident in an offensive line entering into a season for Ohio State. And I think a big reason because of that is because of the returning guards, guys like Austin Siereveld, the transfers they brought in, and Ethan Oyanwa and Phillip Daniels. You agree or disagree?
Oh man. I mean, I think the 2019 offensive line was fire. But
did you have as much confidence going into the season with them as maybe you do? Because by all accounts, like you said, there's a second round left tackle this year in the draft on this team. There's an interior of the national championship offensive line coming into this. Really, the only question you have is right tackle, and you got a guy in the draft in the transfer portal for that, right? And Phillip Daniels.
Yeah, I'll phrase it this way: I am most confident in the versatility of this line. So I think Siereveld actually might be someone who could fill in at right tackle if Daniels doesn't step up the way we think he does.
Hmm.
Sorry. I'm saying we a lot. On this show, I'm not an Ohio State fan. On this show, I am a Big Ten analyst. I don't think I would see Siereveld maybe fill in more for Daniels as a bigger possibility. And so I'm confident in the versatility. I'm not. I think the two question marks I still have are how do they gel together as a unit? And then also, I think the overall talent level, I think 2019 and then maybe even 2022, there was a bit more confidence, especially at the tackle spot, Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones. But I think in terms of versatility, absolutely.
Very good. Very good. Don't preach your Buckeye. Don't deny it.
That's I am, but I'm trying to be. I don't want to stump for a team on here. That's not what I'm trying to do. But you're right. You called me out. Oh darn! Yeah, you called me out, Philip, and I deserved it. So
no, we've actually got a number of Michigan fans kind of talking about us on Twitter this past week about how although we are Buckeye fans, we are fair to both teams. They feel like so.
Who was saying that
was us? Right. That was encouraging to me, and I hope the Michigan fans do feel that way because that's what we're trying to do. I don't try to be a homer. I just try to share my honest thoughts about both programs. And at the end of the day, if one of them deserves praise, I'll give them praise, even if I throw it up in my mouth a little bit while I'm saying it. All right, let's move on to a program that does not make me throw up in my mouth, and that is Northwestern. Zack, I think this is your secret fandom here a little bit. If you weren't an Ohio State fan, I think you might become a Northwestern fan. I don't know if that's actually true or not. Just you give me that vibe. But Evan Bernstein,
you're saying I'm a nerd. That's what you're saying.
That's not what I said, Zack. Evan Bertston, however you pronounce it. I'm terrible with last names. I apologize. He has come in as a transfer portal player from South Dakota State, as well as Minnesota's Martez Lewis, Liberty's Xavier Gray. It sounds like there's a lot of hype coming into the spring practice and through the spring practice as well about this offensive line for Northwestern. In addition to that, they also have Caleb Tiernan, who was probably their best offensive lineman last year coming back. This could be a very good offensive line group for David Braun. It could seem like he could put his quarterback in a much better position, Preston Stone, than Jack Lausch was in last year with some of the struggles that they had. It was not, a bad offensive line, but there were definitely some struggles and some things that could be corrected. And so as David Braun wants to do with running the ball, there could be some better options here with a more experienced, more depth on the offensive line, and honestly just bigger. I mean, there are some guys that are absolutely massive on this offensive line that are just going to be able to push dudes, and that's going to really, really help Northwestern here. Thoughts on some of these players in spring practice, and in particular, Evan Bertson, looking good, and everybody else. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to find. I feel like there's been a number of linemen recently from Northwestern that have been like either All-Americans or have been drafted. I think it's All-Americans, but Peter Skronsky is the one I'm thinking of in particular recently, who is really highly regarded from Northwestern. And I think sometimes we forget that these lesser talented teams sometimes do a really good job of identifying talent that flies under the radar and then develops them. I think we often think of Iowa and Wisconsin as kind of like that, but Northwestern does that sneakily. And so to hear some of these reports, again, it's spring. You have to take everything with a grain of salt with spring. Like even the Billy Edwards, I know we were raving about Billy Edwards earlier. Everybody's great in the spring. Like nobody's kind of sitting there like, oh, they were just awful. Like nobody says that in the spring. Right. So that being said, though, I do think it's something to pay attention to, especially knowing the depth on the defensive line for Northwestern. Because if Northwestern comes into the season with line play that has depth and is competent, you're talking about a team that can surprise, which, again, you look at Northwestern's track record, especially back under Fitzgerald, it was like every other year, 3-9, and then like 8-4 or 9-3 in a Big Ten championship appearance. And so I think when everybody is down on Northwestern, that's when you have to keep your eye peeled for something really good out of Evanston. And so, and by the way, we're going to get a little bit of a hint of that. I'm recording tomorrow night with Westlot Pirates about Northwestern's 2024 season. But I think this is something to really keep your eye on, because if their offensive line is good and Preston Stone really does hit, you're going to see upsets. That's my, not so hot take, is you're going to see some upsets from the Wildcats.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing, right? Protect Preston Stone and give him a run game that can actually be, something worthwhile to take some of the pressure off of him. I think Northwestern did a good job of going into the portal and just getting dudes that can run block for you. I don't think they got the most athletic dudes in the world that are going to be, fantastic pass blockers, but I think with dudes that are going to be able to run block for you, get more of a running game, I don't think they have to be the best pass blockers in the world, because that means you're going to find yourself in more 3rd and 4 situations rather than 3rd and 9 situations. Yep. And obviously the 3rd and 9 situations are when the defensive ends can just kind of pin their ears back and go straight after the quarterback. And that's when you find yourself in a bad situation as a quarterback with not as good of an offensive line. All right, Zach, last one here, and then we will move on to the Matt Weiss discussion. Amare Ferrell, he is a safety for Indiana. He has been kind of looked at as stepping into a leadership role so far in the Indiana spring football practices. This is obviously good news for Indiana with the defense that lost some players last year. They're obviously bringing some players back, but the more leadership, the better. Ferrell came in saying, at the end of the day, I just want to help the team win in any way possible I can. Coach Haynes puts me in the best position to make a lot of plays, so I feel I always have to give thanks to him for that. I feel like I did a good job with the position change, though. Last year, I believe he was a cornerback. This year, a safety. I think that's huge for Indiana. That was one of the knocks I had on them with their defense, is that they didn't go into the portal, and I felt like get enough safety help. So if Ferrell can come in, be a better safety for him, add to the secondary there, you could find yourself with Caleb or D'Angelo. I don't know if I say Caleb.
D'Angelo Pons.
D'Angelo Pons. You can find yourself possibly with the freshman Bryant, possibly starting there at cornerback, and then Ferrell, some other ones. It could be a really good situation here for the Indiana defense, as Coach Bryant Haynes. I mean, he's a really good defensive coordinator. He can put something pretty special together. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting more leadership out of that secondary. I mean, it was a good secondary a year ago. I mean, even the teams that had really good receiver play, I mean, I thought they played Ohio State really well. I thought they played Notre Dame really well. And not that Notre Dame's got great receivers, but I mean, they were a well-balanced offense. And I thought the defense in particular played really well outside of that huge run by Jeremiah Love. So,
well, I mean, Indiana had more rushing yards than Ohio State in that game. Yep. People forget about that.
Yeah. And so they've held up well, and, they're losing a couple guys, obviously CJ West being probably the biggest one at defensive line. But for you to have another force in that defensive backfield, along with a front that, still has Mikel Kamara, still has some other guys that they're really excited about, you're seeing a team, I think, that they believe in themselves, and a team that believes they can produce leaders and big time guys. And I think that's huge, right? Like that, if you're going to take the next leap from a 1-year wonder to being a perennial program in contention, you need to not have a really nice leader like once in a while. You need to have a culture of leadership, and you have to have people stepping up all the time. That's what it sounds like they're doing. And so good on them.
Yeah, Totally agree, and I agree with you, John. Aiden Fisher, I mean, he's the leader of that defense, and that's what you want in your linebacker. But Zach makes a great point, and that's kind of what I was alluding to. Just a culture of leadership, a culture of guys who are getting there with each other and developing more leaders as well. Because, like John points out, Byron Baldwin is another four-star player in that secondary. Could possibly be cornerback, could possibly be safety. We'll see what happens this year, but he could find himself, even if he's not starting, with some playing time. It's going to give them some options to possibly rotate there,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have that option, that's even better for him. Byron Baldwin, that's a name to know, going forward for Indiana because he could really develop and be something special there for Indiana. All right, Zach.